Good afternoon, the network of ours. Happy Wednesday. Happy summer. Happy Toronto floods. A good time to be super warm. This is Recruiting EQ episode 23. Somehow 2023. I'm always shocked at how many episodes it is. So it's getting old, I know, but I'm still shocked. Nonetheless, we are joined by my good buddy, Sergey. Sergey, thank you for being here with us today.
Of course, of course.
To discuss our topic of rap battle, agency versus corporate, pros and cons. This is a juicy one. I know it's going to be juicy. If you guys are listening or whatever, tell your friends to jump on here because this is a big argument, debate that has been ongoing since before I started doing Rec to Rec, but it's definitely a hot topic. And we're going to solve all the world's problems by 1 p.m. We're not going to do that, but we are going to talk about them. Quick disclaimer before we launch into it. Sergey and I are in a third-party app, right? We're not on LinkedIn. So if your comment is longer, it may not appear the whole comment. If you respond to us, please do comment. There's been a lot of great participation in the past few episodes. So would love to see your thoughts, opinions, questions on this topic, stories, anecdotes, heartaches, nightmares, hopes, dreams, everything. But apologies if they don't come in order, which I've been told they don't always. And also another thing, this is being recorded and simulcast out to a couple places. So we're not going to name you directly in the interest of people's privacy, etc. But please give us all of your thoughts. Sergey, can you do the good people a favor and introduce yourself a little bit and a bit about what you do?
Yeah, totally. Pleasure to be here. And just wanted to mention, you're going to be dropping notes in the chat. Good to understand here, like where people are, located, and if you're currently doing agency or in-house recruiting, or maybe you've done both. That'll be a great kind of way to understand the audience here. But so for myself, my name is Sergey. Like Rick said, I have been in tech recruiting for a little over 10 years. I got into it on the agency side. Was doing sales at first, contract sales for a specialty tech staffing agency. Within about 6 months, I transitioned into a 360 role, started filling some of my own jobs. I was an agency in that agency for 3.5 years, left to start my own, did some consulting at first, some interesting projects, RPOs, and ultimately got into the world of software and started my own recruiting tech company, which, it failed ultimately. We ran out of money, long story short, but it was a wild ride, and I wouldn't change a thing. Went back to agency for a little bit, a couple of years, and 2020, when COVID came in, things kind of, everything froze, and I made the transition to go in house. So the last 4 years, I've been leading tech recruiting in early to mid stage tech startups from Series B to Series D in Canada as well as the US. So yeah, that's a couple of layoffs later. So I was laid off the last two in-house recruiting roles that I had, and now I'm transitioning into doing some rec to rec recruiting, doing some freelancing, consulting. So kind of playing the market a little bit, and trying to be as useful as I can.
Playing the market, it is. I think none of us have any choice. We all have to play the market now. You have an interesting background, Sergey, for this conversation, which is, of course, why we're here. Is that, you and I were talking about it, and I've seen you talk about it with other people. It is obviously there's the age old vision or picture that people have in their head of what it is to work in house versus working in agency. Both of those don't seem to be the case necessarily anymore. It's a bit the Wild West now, I would say. No.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like, if you've never done one or the other and you're just going by what people are saying, even though that can be helpful, and like I'm obviously going to give my perspective, but you know, neither place is perfect. There's pros and cons to agency and in-house recruiting. At least on the in-house side, things are changing very rapidly, and just the last few years have been super turbulent, a lot of a lot of disruption, a lot of layoffs. Obviously, like people know have seen that. So when I was back in agency, I used to think like I used to be like very much like, oh, the grass is greener on the other side. In house, I was kind of like very eager to make that transition, which I ultimately did. Um, there's definitely some great things about being an in-house recruiter, and we're going to talk about those. But it's not perfect. It's definitely got its downsides, and so does agency. But yeah, like right now, I'd say it's 50-50 in terms of like what might be the right avenue for you. So hopefully we can give people some context and things to think about. And the one advice I would say is when I was first considering in-house roles and interviewing for them, definitely talk to some in-house recruiters, get the lay of the land so you can ask the right questions and don't just jump into any opportunity, because just like on agency, they can vary. Like the in-house opportunities can really vary. So knowing what you're getting into is helpful.
Yeah, I think you're right there because it's having a mental picture in your head of what a job is like is so out the window that it's like without speaking to people who are actually doing it, preferably at the company or formerly at the company that you're looking at, is very eye opening. And we know this obviously from being, rec to recs or talking to other people. It's usually like, oh, like perception versus reality. It's kind of it can be very surprising what it's really like.
100%.
That's great advice. Let's go back to the agency experience. What brought you into agency in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I didn't plan on being in recruiting or staffing. Like this is like the most common thing you hear when you talk to recruiters. I got recruited into an agency, so I'm sure that's also not unique. I was doing sales. I did software sales. I did door to door sales. I did professional services sales. So, I think just like we do now a little bit, we try to find people that are salespeople, to find for agencies. That's what happened. I got, recruited into a sales role. And it just so happened that the agency I was recruited into was an established finance and accounting shop. And then they had kind of launched a tech division not too long ago. And because I have a background in tech and software engineering, and the sales experience at the time, that just made a really strong kind of profile, I think. And it was the right move. Really, I loved my time, kind of learning the agency business. And we'll talk about this, but one of the best things I loved about it is like you're just talking to so many like interesting companies and cool people that are building the tech, right? They're like on the front lines, and you get to get like all the scoop about what the latest and greatest in tech is, which that was probably my favorite thing about it. But yeah, I started doing sales, cold calling, 120 dials a day, just trying to
Oh
get
man,
meetings with people. Yeah.
120 dials a day. The
Yeah.
memories. So you started on the sales side, just 180 sales, and then moved into doing delivery and actual like recruiting, phone screening, sourcing afterward, which is a little
Yeah.
different than some people, right? A lot of people come into it learning recruitment first and then maybe move to sales or maybe don't.
Yeah, I think at the time, I was kind of like getting a little bit fed up with doing sales. It's like same old, right? Like all the cold calling, all the dials, all the rejection. I mean, like no matter how good you are at it, like it's not your favorite thing to do, right? To get rejected and the
Yeah.
phones hung up on you. So, and I think I encountered a problem pretty early on in my recruiting staffing agency career that I think a lot of salespeople probably encounter, is that I was actually getting really good at sales. I was booking a lot of meetings. I was bringing in a lot of new clients, but the delivery was kind of lagging a little bit, and that's really frustrating, right? Like when you've spent all this time and energy to get this new client, you're selling them, right? So you're promising them that you're going to
Yeah.
deliver, and then you don't see a candidate submitted for like a week or two, and it just gets really frustrating. So I was in the office late one evening and looking at one of my jobs. I was just like, let me take a peek in the database, like how difficult can this be? And you have all the numbers for all the candidates, and I just started dialing people that maybe nobody has called or reached out to in a while, and they answered and they were happy to talk to me. So instantly it was just like this light bulb of like, oh wow, this is very different.
Yeah.
it has some of the same thrills, I would say, in terms of like you're talking to somebody that could turn into a placement, and that means money in your pocket, right? Commission, which is why most people do sales. So it had a lot of the same elements of like sales, but it was just very different dynamic. So I kind of instantly fell in love with it.
And did you start doing 360 as a result? Like, were you filling your own jobs, or did you fall in love with it and want to move more to a delivery focused role? Like, what was the sequence
Yeah,
of?
yeah. So I started filling my own jobs. I mean, we had a nice delivery team, like very experienced. Like looking back on it, I was very ambitious, very like driven. So I, kind of wanted it now and wanted
Yeah,
it fast. But ultimately, like we did have a very good experienced delivery team that 80-90% of the jobs I brought in, they, were closed through, our delivery team. But I managed to start filling my own jobs, and that felt amazing, right? Not only
yeah,
because you kind of have the full control over it, but also, the commission is like, get double the commission. So um, within like couple of months of moving into sort of 360 and trying to get my own candidates, I made a big placement. It was like, it was even to this day, probably one of the biggest placements I've ever made. Right? It was
yeah.
like a business intelligence architect. It was like a really nice, juicy one,
The juicy
and
tea, I bet.
it was my own client, my own candidate. I did the
Yeah,
whole thing, and it just felt awesome. So from that point on, I was doing, I would say like 70 to 80% BD and account management, but I would fill my own jobs. I don't know, maybe like again 20-30% of the jobs I would fill on my own, and it was like a nice balance, right? So that's kind of how I did it. But my bread and butter, and really what I was the best at, was new business development, was account management. So like I definitely stayed with that, leveraged that. I didn't want to like completely drop that.
mm,
All the way until I switched and went in house, which is then I'm 100% delivery.
yeah. Two questions for you on that front. The first one is, and I get this a lot. Like, if people start at an agency like like a Tech Systems or Robert Half, or like a big name agency, a lot of them start as recruiters. They get them like out of college or out of service or out of something like that, right? And they'll throw them into recruiting training. They'll train them as a recruiter, and then you get, so you're sourcing first, then you're a full recruiter, blah blah blah, like 3-4 titles of just being a recruiter as you move through the ranks and you hit certain metrics. Then you get promoted to being an account manager, and then you get promoted to doing sales. So there's a lot of people out there who have this impression that being a recruiter and doing delivery is a junior function that's there for when you
Mm,
don't know what you're doing and you're just a kid and you're fresh, and that doing sales is a huge promotion. How does, I mean, I certainly don't feel that way about it because I came from sales too and then started doing recruiting as well.
yeah.
I didn't feel like I was taking a step down to fill my own jobs or whatever at all. I don't,
Hmm.
how does that misconception, do you think that's a misconception, or how do you feel about it?
Um, you definitely see a lot of, in recruiting agencies, like you'll see a lot of sort of junior people coming in, both on the sales and on the, recruiting delivery side. Yep, it's kind of like sink or swim most of the time. It's high pressure, and you have to produce, deliver um, early on, whether you're in sales or in recruiting. It's hard for me to tell because I kind of developed into a recruiter over time. Like I came in on the sales side. I would say probably you can get away with more, or you can be more successful right out of the gate doing sales, just because if you're really driven, if you're persistent, if you hit the numbers, you make the dials, you reach out to people, you network, you can bring in some business, and then you have like experienced delivery people and recruiters that'll help you fill it. You so much of it is like getting success early on. If you're new to the business, whether you're recruiting or sales, so important to get that win, to get that commission, to get that boost of confidence. I think generally a person can be equally successful, fresh into the industry, sales or recruiting. But recruiting, especially if it's specialty like tech, it's a little bit trickier. It's harder in
Yeah,
some ways, but both of them are hard. And
yeah.
to start from scratch with no experience, yeah, it's tough either way. And you see a lot of people come and go. There's a ton of turnover, which is part of the part of the reason, I guess one of the cons, in agency recruiting is that you're going to see a lot of good people come and go, and it's just it's a grind for sure.
Yeah, for sure. How do you feel about the stigma of people who used to do sales, particularly in agency, and then went in house? A lot of times that's scorched earth for agency people. They don't want to talk to you again because they're just like, oh, well, everybody who goes in house thinks that it's a cushy job. And of course, we'll get to that in a second, but thinks that in
Yeah,
house is going to be a cushy job. And they only do it when they can't sell. They do it when they're no good.
yeah. I haven't seen. I guess in my case, it is somewhat true. Like I kind of went from being mostly a sales guy to an in-house, recruiter. I think that's more rare probably than somebody that's doing delivery in an agency or 360 or whatever. At least has some exposure to recruiting, to make that switch. But I just personally haven't been exposed to as many folks like that. Like in my 4 years that I've been in house recruiting, I haven't really seen anybody come in through like sales in agency to like switch to recruiting. I'm
Yeah.
sure it happens, but it would be a harder transition for sure, to make. To go from straight up sales, not kind of touching, sourcing candidates and interviewing and all that sort of thing, and just go straight into an in-house role. I would imagine that that'd be harder to just getting into a good in-house recruiting role is hard enough as it is,
Now, especially.
especially now. I mean, now it's honestly like it's probably one of the hardest jobs to get just because of the mismatch between like supply and demand.
Yeah.
And I don't think the demand side, we'll talk about that, but I don't think that's improving anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
um, but it's tough to get into a good in-house job. If you have agency recruiting experience, and there is some companies that see that as an advantage because you're kind of more of that hunter. You're probably better at sourcing and reaching passive candidates. But to go from sales to straight up in-house recruiting, it's there's a lot of transferable skills, but it'll probably be a tougher sell and a tougher transition to make,
I believe.
especially
Yeah.
now. Like especially now, I would say that's not a good bet right now.
So what prompted you to go in-house? What was the sequence of events from liking it in agency, from feeling great about filling your own jobs? At some point you were like, you know what, I want to go in-house. How did that play out?
Yeah, man, that's a huge question, and that whole period of time is such a blur, right? I mean, COVID had just happened.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was pretty much at a high point in my agency career. Um, I was working with a really amazing like tech agency here in Toronto, very close knit group of people. We're having a lot of fun and doing really good business. I was doing 360, mostly sales, but also we were doing some really interesting projects. Like the global talent stream program had just come out, and we were starting to roll that out and basically help people hire internationally and bring people to
Cool.
Canada. Fantastic program. It's still around, still exists. That was really exciting. We had a little machine learning project. We brought in consultants and we were trying to see like, hey, how can we match people from our database to these new jobs that are coming in quickly? Because that's part of the difficulty. Is in agency you have this huge database. In house is similar. Uh, that's like you have all this insight on all these people, but manually finding people looking through it is very tedious. Machine learning is perfectly designed for that. We had some amazing traction with that just kind of early on, seeing some signs that like, wow, this can really work. And then COVID happens and everything just grinds to a halt, right?
Jobs.
Like all the clients, at least my clients, my sort of book of business, everything froze, no hiring. I'm sitting at home, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, goes by, and it's just kind of like there's so much uncertainty there. And you know, I'd gotten married, just a year or so before that, and you start looking around, and you're like, hey, I have to think about maybe doing something else. So that was like a catalyst for the change, but it wasn't like the full story. It wasn't the full picture, and like, we'll talk about some of these pros and cons, but I think the biggest thing is like, I've always optimized my career for learning. You
Yeah.
know, most people go into agency and stay in agency mostly for the money. Like if you're looking to make more money, agency is the way to go versus in house. Like no full stop period. But that wasn't it for me. Like for me it was the learning. So I always thought when I was working with clients is like I want to know what's going on behind the scenes there. Like what's really happening, what is the full interview process like, how does all that kind of come together and work. So the learning was probably a big motivator for me. I like a challenge, so it was also like, hey, something different. At the time also a steady paycheck, like a
Yeah.
good sort of base salary, which you'll get a better base typically if you're experienced. Like you'll get a better base when you go in house. Um, that was a little bit lucrative at the time. I thought this is the stable way to go. I do not think that anymore, and we'll talk about that. But there was like a lot of reasons, and last but not least, and this one is true. I found is in agency you make a placement and it feels great, right? Like
Yeah.
you got to win. You have some commission coming, but that's kind of where it ends. Like you still maintain the relationship with the candidate and everything, but I kind of wanted to see, like, I wanted to be there when the person starts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to shake their hand. I wanted to see how they're going to, fit into the team and make an impact. And just like in agency, it can be a bit of a lone wolf type of, it's a pretty, can be dog eat dog and very competitive with each other, right? Because you're all competing kind of um, for the same business and placements. And I'm a team guy. Like I grew up playing team sports. So I wanted to feel like, I'm really like part of the team. I'm really building something, like help build this company. So those things, you get, at least from my experience, like I got some of that working in house and that was really great. So yeah, there was a lot of things going on that made
For
me make that
sure.
switch.
I think that there's a lot of like I hear that I did some in-house work myself, but not that much. And it was also during COVID, so that because the same reason, it was just sort of like, oh, I mean, what the hell? I think I had two candidates who had offers in at the beginning of March 2020. One of them started at the end of October 2020 for a fully remote job. They could have started before, but
Hmm.
nobody wanted to move. Nobody wanted to move on offers, so we couldn't invoice them because that was the deal. And then the other person just decided to go back home to Europe, not be a recruiter
Hmm.
anymore because people were changing their minds about their whole lives during COVID, right? So
Mhm,
it
mhm.
was it was an interesting time to see. But
Yeah.
it is, you raise an interesting point about feeling good when you make a placement or feeling like you have impact or feeling like you're part of something. They both exist on both sides, I find, but just in a
Mhm.
different way, right? Like if you make an agency placement, your team, you high five each other, you go out for drinks if that's your thing, or whatever it is you do with your team, because
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, we landed a placement. In house, it's also there's an element where it's just kind of like, that's your job. So yeah, good, you did your job. Yay!
Yeah.
Pat on the back. Now go fill the next rec. You have interviews the next morning. It's not like we're gonna
Yeah.
go celebrate because you hired somebody. That's your freaking job.
For sure. For sure. For sure. That definitely became pretty obvious, and I think that's one of the reasons. Now when I'm kind of zoomed out a little bit on this whole journey and in-house and agency, that's definitely a big sort of focus point for me. Is that yes, in-house, it feels great to make that big hire. Especially if it's a
Yeah,
tough role and you've worked really hard. You know, and you make that placement finally, and it is this moment of like excitement, and yeah, still you get the high fives and everything, and but then yeah, there's not as much gravity attached to it, because in agency, like, that's a really good chunk of money, right, that you have
yeah,
coming with a placement like this. Yeah, in house, like you said, it's on to the next pretty quickly. uh, within a few hours, or a few minutes, you're already like thinking about the next interview you have, and what you have going on next. It's the gratifying thing is the when that person starts and you kind of get to interact with them and on the other side of things, and you're now part of the same team. So there's a little bit of that gratification. You get to see the person more frequently and stuff. So, but that also, like, ultimately, like, everybody's there to do a job, and over time, like, it just kind of, everybody falls into their own teams. So it's not quite as I had this idealistic, sort of picture of it, that, like, oh, I'm going to bring all these great people in, and, like, I'm going to have, like, you know, um, we're all going to be like best friends. So
Yeah.
it's not quite like that, but it is gratifying to, like, especially when you see that people that you brought in are contributing, like, to the company, that are, like, you get people, like, recognizing them for contributions they make or problems they solve. Like, that is very gratifying to me.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
which in agency, it kind of stops once you make the placement, you get the commission. You keep in touch with the person, but it's not as, like, you don't get to really feel those things on a daily, weekly basis.
Yeah. I mean, I feel fortunate that I do feel like I have that relationship with some of my clients, especially as a 360, where,
Mm.
sometimes depending what you're doing in agency, you can get in at the new expansion or new enterprise or new startup sort of scale and talk to people a lot and visit them and help them build an entire team from scratch and so on.
Hmm.
Those projects are a little bit more rare in agency for sure, but they exist. So when you can work on those, it's fun. I also, do you feel like it was different for you, the vibe as an employee, doing a job
Yeah.
at a company, which is what the company does? Meaning, if you're doing recruitment at a staffing agency, that is what that company does. You are the most
Hmm.
important piece of the chain. You are what the company does. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're working in TA, you're a larger part of it in the HR department. The company doesn't do TA. You're hiring people to do something. You're not directly a part of what this company does. You're
Yeah.
supporting, but you're not, the front lines. You're a support
Yeah.
person. Did that Was there a difference for you psychologically in your day to day, in a good way, in a bad way? Like, how does that sit with you?
Yeah, yeah.
Looking back at it.
100%. 100%. I mean, the sort of the ego boost that you get from being an agency recruiter is, like, second to none. Like you said, you are the key player. You're on the front lines. Like, you bring in revenue into the organization. And you're sort of, uh, to your clients, you're a knowledgeable expert, a consultant. You come in and sort of, you're like the Marines in a way. Like, if you're really good, you're coming in when things are not working, and
Yeah,
they've
yeah,
tried other things, they can't fill it themselves. So
yeah,
there's definitely this ego boost attached when you can fix the problem, when you can solve, get the job done. And so there's that for sure. Absolutely, when you're in house, you're important if you're good, especially, and if you deliver. You get recognition, but it doesn't, for sure, it's not the same level, of the type of recognition and sort of confidence and things that you get when you're in an agency, and you're a high performer, you're a high producer. There's nothing quite like it, in terms of, like, just what it feels like, from a, I guess, a ego perspective, which is,
yeah.
it's a good thing. But one of the things that all happens in an agency, the flip side of that, you got a lot of big egos, uh,
Yes,
and there's a lot
always.
that can go with that. And like I said, it can be pretty competitive, and emotions can run high because there's a lot of money on the line and everything. So it depends on, like I said, both things have pros and cons. And it's just, what appeals better to you, and who you are, and also what you need at that time. I find that, and that's true with candidates as well. When I work with candidates, is like, our careers, go through different stages. What is important to you when you're in your first job out of college, or in your mid 20s, or whatever, can be different than what's important to you, if you have a family, children, and different sort of stages in your life. So, yeah, there's no right or wrong. I don't think. It's just very individual.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so off the back of the topic of there's no right or wrong, let's hit some of the cons, right? Because I mean, talking your own experience and talking to other people who are recruiters, there's definitely some very popular cons to, let's start with agency, right? Because
Hmm.
we'll go in order of your experience and mine to an extent. Starting with agency, I mean, there's very popular drawbacks to working in an agency. Some of which are legacy drawbacks that have always been there. But I think currently, like in a post-COVID world, there are
Hmm.
drawbacks for sure. How are you feeling about that? Like, what are the negatives that you would say to somebody that who's considering to like, go into agency?
It's like a little therapy session, Like,
Perfect.
let me think back. And I mean, to be fair, I haven't been in agency since 2020, so I haven't
Right.
seen as much of this post-COVID thing. But honestly, from what I'm hearing and sort of talking to people that I know in the agency world, it's changed. But I mean, at the core of it, it's still the same business.
Yeah.
It's still the same kind of dynamics. So
True that. True that.
um, the drawbacks, the kind of the cons of it that I found is first of all is very high pressure, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what kind of like sort of structure you're on, whether I've spent a lot of time working on a draw, right? Being later on in my career, sort of being a independent contractor, sort of working for myself. Anybody that's run a business before understands, knows that there's a lot that comes with that. When you're working on a draw, the pressure level is very high. If you don't make
Yeah.
a placement for 1 month, you're feeling it. If luckily it hasn't happened to me much, but if you don't make a placement, in a couple months, like you're really feeling it. And I've
Yeah.
seen people that go into a slump and maybe can't get out of it for a few months. I mean, it really eats at people.
For
So it's
sure.
an extremely high pressure environment. We'll talk about it on the in-house side. There's also a lot of pressure in-house, which I thought when I made the switch, and I think a lot of people that are considering it probably are thinking there's going to be a lot more laid back and chill and like not as much pressure. But there's different kinds of pressure in-house. But agency can definitely be a lot more stressful. It can be a very metrics driven, right? Especially earlier on. Like once you kind of prove yourself and you deliver. Ultimately, the only thing that matters is if you deliver. If you get the placements, you get the revenue, the commission. But it can be very metrics driven. Like if you're not hitting your whatever outreach numbers, calls, or whatever meetings booked or whatever, again that pressure ramps up pretty
Yeah.
quickly, which makes it harder to do quality work, quite frankly, afterwards. So the pressure is probably a big one. With that kind of work life balance, if you will, if you want work life balance, agency recruiting probably not the best place. Now I do want to say this, and I hear you say it quite a bit, Rick, is that not all agencies are the same, right? No two
Sure.
agencies are exactly the same. I've worked for sort of both, like sort of mid-sized regional firms to like small boutique agencies to like doing consulting for myself.
Yeah.
The work-life balance is going to be very different, I think, depending on what kind of size, stage, and just the culture of the agency that you join. But generally, it tends to be like, I mean, some of the big multinationals, like you hear people working like 7 a.m. to 7, 8, 9 p.m. working on Saturdays. Like
Yeah.
it's just like there's and that's expected. That's
Oh,
not
yeah.
even like, it's not like if you're driven and if you want to make it, like you do that. No, that's
No,
just the
no.
way it
That's
is.
everybody. Yeah.
And when you talk to people that are doing that, especially earlier on in their career, I mean, they're not being productive in those 10th, 11th, 12th hour of the day. Most of the time, you're just like you can't, right? Like so, it's a little bit of like very very little work life balance. Like it's hard to get away. Like vacation time is typically like on the lower end of the allocations. So that can be hard. The work life balance, can be really tough. So those are a couple of the big ones. There's a stigma around agency, recruiters and people in general. So it never really bothered me that much because I always felt like I was trying to conduct myself with as much, integrity and honesty and transparency. And I think over time, like I built a nice kind of network and client base that appreciated that. So you do get that sort of validation, and that offsets the stigma, that
Yeah.
you kind of hear. But it is out there, and I think for some people it can be difficult to kind of overcome that. So um, those are the big ones. And then if you, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was going to say, I think you raised a really good point there. And I would throw in that if you're going to do an agency job, it is entrepreneurial. And I feel like that works better in a smaller agency because you actually get paid like a like a startup person instead of being in a big agency. But being in a big agency is a great learning ground for sure,
Hmm.
like to train. But I feel like it's on a personal level, you need to be really good at you need to be good at knowing how to rest whenever you can and keeping your stamina up. But I think you also need to have good boundaries that you can self set to be driven, like to know when to be driven and when to actually rest. Because otherwise you could just burn out, or you
Yeah.
could keep saying screw this, they don't deserve my time, and have an attitude about it, which happens to, I would say, 50% of the people I train new to recruitment. They're like, you know what, screw this, screw these guys, why do they want me to be?
Hmm.
If you think you're doing it for them, you're in the wrong job. I mean, you're doing it for
Hmm.
yourself. Yes, they want you to make them money, but if you're not in it with an entrepreneurial spirit of doing it for yourself, you're never going to set those boundaries. You're never going to be driven. You're never going to succeed at
Yeah.
any sales job, really. But recruiting is a bad one because it's humans,
Yeah.
unpredictable humans that could change their mind at 9 p.m., at 2 in the morning about anything. You know,
Yeah.
it's a 24
Yeah.
7 job, as one of our people commented. It is kind of, she's not wrong. It is a kind of a
Yeah.
24/7.
Yeah, for sure. And you make a really good point that setting boundaries is really important. And I learned that sort of in the later years of even being in house, setting
Yeah.
boundaries is equally important. And honestly, work life balance, just like in house, just like agencies are not all the same, they all kind of differ. In house roles, depending on the company you're in, depending on the culture the company has, can really make a huge difference in terms of like work life balance, what's expected, the boundaries that you can set. But I'd say ultimately you do have control over that. And later on in my career in the last few years, I got much better at saying like, "Hey, this is the hours I work, and nothing is
Yeah.
that critical that it can't wait until the next morning." So there's some exceptions, but for the most part, you have to know what you're comfortable with, and that comes with time and experience, and kind of understanding the value that you bring, and also understanding that kind of like the timing of things and what is urgent and what is not. And it's so much more important to do a quality job every day
Yeah.
versus the hours that you put in. Like to me, that's the biggest thing is quality versus quantity. In my opinion, nobody really works a true 9 to 5 day. I have times, first thing in the morning or at night when I'm thinking about my work, I'm solving problems in my head.
Yeah.
To me that's working. So and then there's times between like regular work hours where I'm not I'm not really as focused, and just like for whatever reason I need a break. So to me that's really important to understand also yourself and your own rhythms, and just focus on getting the job done, getting the quality of your work done. And then yeah, I think that's the most important thing.
For sure. There's a big topic that we hit in 2021, 2022. We're still seeing the fallout from it a little bit now, but might as well dive into this part of the conversation, which is a lot of people obviously got hired into in-house positions, whether they were from agency or from college, even given exorbitant salaries because of the market swing during COVID. It swung in this other direction crazily, like ridiculously, even one might say. And everybody wanted to go in house, and everybody thought and knows friends. Everybody knows at least three people who got an in house job with a great salary. Maybe most of them got laid off, maybe some of them didn't. But so there's still this stigma flying around with agency people who will talk to someone like me, or like you yourself are doing rec to rec as well. We'll talk to a rec to rec and say like, I'm thinking of going in house. I don't want to stay in agency. And some of these people
Hmm.
are performers, and they're like, I don't want to
Hmm.
talk about other agencies. I don't want to learn if other agencies are different. I have decided that what I want to do for myself is to go in house
Hmm.
for many reasons. But the popular ones I hear are stability,
Hmm.
impact, and that it's a less stressful environment.
Mm.
How should we tackle those three based on your experience? I'm sure there's some truth to it to an extent, but how do you feel
Yeah.
about people who want to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's I love talking to people about this because again, I went through that entire kind of cycle. And I think if you really have that urge to go in house, like if you feel like that's the right move for you, you know, um, I would say like nothing wrong in exploring it. Like the way somebody told me this when I started with agencies, but like if you're good agencies are always going to take you back. Like if you're a good performer, a good biller, a good recruiter, you deliver, you go do a stint in house, you can find your way back into agency. So, but it's good to be informed. It's good to understand the pros and cons, and the three that you mentioned, absolutely. And I mean, let's see where we can start. First of all, like, yes, the compensation, like the base compensation, is usually better, like in house, but the last few years have really taken a big hit because the market is
Yeah.
just so flooded with really great recruiters that are really experienced. Like a lot of times, they are, maybe even taking a step back from the types of roles that they've had before. Maybe they've led teams. Maybe they've, been like at a later stage companies. They need to scale back, take and a lot of times take a pay cut. I did that, because there's just no, like, it was hard getting interviews. Forget about jobs. Like, it was
Yeah.
really hard to get an interview the last couple of years. So, um, and you get in whatever number you get in at, you're pretty much going to stay there. I mean, like the last couple of years, like companies weren't really giving many raises, especially to recruiters. And a lot of people get in, myself included. I forgot to mention this before. Is like career progression, right? You want to, because an agency, you kind of you are who you are. If you're a good, you know, biller contributor, most likely, the agency and you, there's momentum. You kind of want to stay there. You can grow into like leadership roles, but it's just, it doesn't maybe happen as much. You want to go in house to build a career, to progress. Again, especially right now, very hard to come by because organizations are more and more focused on being as lean as possible.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of the tech and tools, and especially AI. I think that trend is just going to intensify. I think within the next 2-3 years, you're going to need one recruiter to do what 3 or 4 needed to do, or a team of 3 or 4 with like recruiting coordinators and sourcers and things like that. That's already been consolidated in many startups into one. Like, you're doing 3 jobs in one. But
Yeah.
with these tools, it's going to get even more intense. So yeah, you get in for stability. I'm pretty confident that stability is not in-house. If anything, there's more stability if you're good at it. There's more stability being an agency recruiter because you're working with a roster of clients. If you're delivering, if you're making money for the business, it's much less likely that, you're like, it's much more in your control.
Yeah.
Where in-house, doesn't matter how many people you hired. Companies go through these growth cycles, right? Especially startups that raise a lot of money, and now they want to hire double their team. That happens all the time. And then you're like pedal to the metal for 6, 8, 9, 12 months, just interviewing and hiring like crazy. And then as soon as the kind of the growth tapers off, or like, you're the first one to go, which I've experienced myself, a few times in the last few years. So stability, not one of those things. I would definitely encourage people to be cautious about that, especially right now, especially in this market. And then,
That's a really
yeah,
strong point, Sergey. Not sorry to interrupt you before you go on to the next one, though. But this whole idea of like you could perform extremely well in your job in house and get let go because you're not doing again the thing the company does. Your support. So even a great support person may get let go. The level of direct control you have over your stability is a roll of the dice. It depends on what's happening in the market, right? So like even
100%.
doing a great job, you might still get let go, which is demotivating like crazy.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I mean, yeah, like, I think I'm a good example. Like, I think I've done an exceptional job in my last few stops in house. I've gotten those types of reviews from my, my managers and the company, and I've been able to accomplish what I was hired to do. But it doesn't matter, when the company knows it's not going to be hiring for the next 3, 6 months, whatever, keeping you on the team is a liability. Like, it's basically like a waste of money.
Yeah.
And it's the first one to go. So yeah, stability, not great. Sorry, what were
No,
the
no worries.
other 2 points that you
Stability,
mentioned?
impact, and
Yeah.
again, just like the lower stress, easier job, more reactive.
Yeah, let's tackle the lower stress.
Sure.
And then, the impact is kind of a more nuanced one, but lower stress to some degree, yes. But again, m- if you're later on in your career or if you have some experience in agency and you kind of build up that, confidence and that, you have a bit of a book of business, or as a recruiter, you have like a good network of good candidates, it does get better, as
Yeah.
you get better at it, you have more confidence. And also, like, if you're working in an agency for a while, like, they know that you can deliver even if you go through a bit of a slump. Like, they'll try to help you, or like, they'll work with you, and ultimately you'll get out of it. So the pressure is absolutely there to produce, because a lot of your bulk of your compensation can be commission based and performance based. In house, the pressure is different, but I would say, at least in my experience, because I've been in house post COVID, like, this whole
Yeah.
time, the pressure is just that it's out of your control in terms of, like, are you going to have a job tomorrow? You know,
Yeah.
it's just the like, especially once you've been through it, like, once you've been through layoffs, and I don't think we talk about it enough. Like, if you're on LinkedIn every day, you'll see people posting, and now you see people posting like, "Hey, I've been looking for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months." Sometimes I've seen a year. Like, the market is really bad. So when you know this, and when the company is not doing so well, or like you're hearing whispers, or like in my case, like, I've been in the past through several rounds of layoffs where I'll survive like the first one, maybe the second one.
Great.
I mean, at that point, the pressure is just like, there's so much uncertainty, and
Yeah,
you
you're
still have to
watching your
show
friend
up.
get let go, right? Like, you're watching your
Yeah,
friend get let go. I mean, like, am I next?
you still have to show up and do a great job, right? So the pressure is different, but it's there. And also the performance, like, the job is similar if you're a recruiter in agency or in house. Like, if you're, an agency kind of mentality recruiter, like, you're sourcing candidates, you're engaging passive candidates, you're, um, going through that motion. The job is fairly similar as far as recruiting goes.
Yeah.
But if in agency, if you have, I don't know, 4 or 5 interviews a week with your clients, and you make like a couple of placements a month, you're doing pretty good. Like, you're making pretty decent money. You feel pretty good about where you are and everything. In house, I've had roles where I would make like 30 placements in a quarter. So you're talking about like 8, 10 placements a month. How many, like, 35, 40 interviews per week? Sometimes like 7, 8, 9 interviews a day. And there's no, if you're in a high growth situation, there's no up, like, that's it, that's your life, that's your everyday.
Yeah.
So the pressure can also be on just being able to perform and keep up, and it just always feels like you're behind the ball, especially if you're, and we can talk about this, if people are considering in-house roles. One of the most important things to know is, like, what are the resources you're going to have, because that's a big difference between agency and in-house as well. But understanding what you're walking into,
Yeah.
what are the expectations? Like, those are the two things. What are the expectations? What am I going to have to deliver on? And what are the resources that I'm going to have? And those two things need to line up. Otherwise, burnout is the, very straightforward trajectory if you get into the wrong situation.
It seems like I feel like when a lot of people talk about the stability and the less stress, I get the impression that what they're talking about is they want, like, not micromanaging, but they want structure. They want to be able to be given this. These are your expectations. Meet them. They're quote unquote realistic, meaning you're gonna have a chill day. You can clock out at 5. You can organize your life, whatever else. And I don't know about you, Sergey, but I feel like that whole way of having a white collar job in Canada anyway is going away. Like, I feel like it's
Mm,
disappearing unless you're proactive, busy, coming up with solutions, bringing different kinds of value. Just having a job where you have, like, you could moderate pace some tasks through an 8-hour day, clock in, clock out. More and more of those jobs are disappearing. And like you touched on before, are these TA jobs going to come back? Right? We have AI
mm,
tools like crazy, which we can touch on now or whatever, that are making the volume possible for one person to at least do some of the grunt work, sourcing or whatever else. I mean, how do you feel about that? Like, how are these jobs
Mm.
that a lot of people have been laid off from, are they going to exist? Are they going to come back, or is
Yeah,
it just a narrowing, ever narrowing pool of in-house
yeah,
recruiters?
yeah. So I'm definitely in the camp of, especially with AI. So I've done quite a bit of experimenting with AI tools in the last, especially the last 6 months, but really over the last year, I've kind of been following it really closely. But some of the tools that are out there now that I've used already, and not just AI, but like a good applicant tracking system with good like advanced functionality, you can like basically a recruitment coordinator, which if you get into a little bit of a later stage company, you have some support in terms of like scheduling interviews and rescheduling and doing all of the admin type of work. That's gone. Like
Yeah,
in my previous role, I automated all of that, pretty much like 90% of
totally.
that, with a good applicant tracking system with good scheduling software. So there's your recruiting coordinators that most likely are not going to be needed in the very near future. Sourcing is another huge, like, I source a lot. That's kind of my that's how I market myself, because I'm an agency recruiter and I know how to engage passive talent. That's a differentiator. There's tools out there now, so just to name a few: Moonhub, um, Juicebox, Hello Holly. I mean, these are all sourcing tools that use AI to really, really like power your searches, where just in natural language you can talk to them and they'll
Yeah,
get you, usually with a little bit of fine tuning, they'll get you the right profiles, and they'll keep doing it 24/7. And they're getting better and better at reaching out to people with personalized messages, engaging them. And the way these technologies work, the more they do it, the better they get at it. So I mean, and it's moving so fast, that I, my personal opinion, I think within a year or two, we're gonna get to like a ratio of like you'll be able to do what you could do with a team of 3 or 4 recruiters, with one good recruiter, like experienced recruiter with the right tools. And I think companies are very like, especially in tech, especially startups, just because they're used to moving fast and pivoting and kind of taking advantage of opportunities and new technology. They're already moving very fast into, okay, we don't need as many people, we can get like really good tech, we can get really good tools, and we can be very lean. And tech scales way better than people, like
yeah.
AI learns, like I said, it works 24/7, it learns constantly, gets better all the time. People just can't, we're not designed like that, right? We have our biological hardware that has its limitations.
I would say that, it's too bad. Like, I think that you're totally right, first of all, and I agree with you. And anybody who watches these on even a semi-regular basis, or even has ever talked to me for 5 minutes, I never shut up about this kind of stuff. That I feel like, it's easy to call it doom and gloom and say, yeah, these jobs are gone. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, so long as we collectively don't still cling to the past and say, oh no, these jobs are gone. Oh crap, but what about those jobs? Why are those jobs gone? What can we do? Should there be some sort of legislation to bring back those jobs? What can we do to just put a lot of focus in the future at bringing back the past? I don't necessarily feel like that's helping anybody. I think that the
Yeah,
quicker we can all come onto this and say, okay, it's trending toward things that can be automated, will be automated. It's always been the case. What, like we were talking earlier, people used to have horse and buggies, then they had cars. They used to have a pen and
yeah,
a pen and an abacus or a pencil, whatever, and they have calculators. And now we have
yeah,
computers, do things to look them up, so you don't need to memorize this. It's just normal, right? Like, it's
yeah,
happened before. It's going to be a big change in the job market, but I think the
yeah,
quicker that we could lean in and go, cool, what do humans do that robots can't do, right? Things
yeah,
like empathy, imagination, whatever. I feel like those could be a big part of what the recruiting job of
yeah.
tomorrow focuses on, more than volume.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, honestly, that's a whole, if you want, we can do another like hour live just on AI in
Yeah,
recruiting and in the job market in general. I mean, this is an incredible, like, first of all, it's super relevant. It's urgent, I think, to have these conversations, But the one thing that in the short term, okay, there's short term, midterm, and long term when you talk about these kinds of technologies. But in the short term, I think the one thing that I've heard is like, AI is not going to take your job, but let's say in this case, a recruiter that's really good at using AI will take your job. So you're absolutely right. I think if like in the short term, maybe midterm, we need to really embrace these technologies and leverage them to get to be more productive and better and more efficient at what we do. And those are the, I think, the recruiters that are going to be marketable, get the best jobs. And there is, with that comes the benefit of, if you're bringing more value to an organization that 2 3 people used to bring, your marketability, your potentially your compensation, you can negotiate, I think, higher compensation, because if you can do the job that 2 or 3 people used to do using these tools, then I think you have something special. So I think I would say that's the number one advice. These tools are out there. Learn them, try them. A lot of them are, because they're new, they're offering a lot of like try before you buy, so you can get
Yep.
like a search going with any of these AI sourcing tools I mentioned for free, and kind of see what they can do. And but yeah, in the mid to long term, I'm in the camp, and we can, again, that's a long conversation. If you follow some like closely what's happening in OpenAI recently, like made public their classification of AI.
Yeah.
They're in stage 1, which is chatbots. The next stage, which it sounds like they're getting ready to release, is the reasoning stage. Reasoning sounds like a lot of what we do, even in the more advanced kind of professions. And then the third one is agents, right? Which is basically like AI that can use tools. Like, so think about it. Like, if I'm a good recruiter and I'm using tools to do my job, now AI can use those tools.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the difference between like horse and buggy, the steam engine, and then industrial revolution and all those kinds of things, is that none of these technologies learned on their own
Yep.
and improved themselves. A horse, you have to tell it where to go and what to do, and it pretty much does that job consistently. Machine learning, AI, neural networks, they learn and get better as the more data they get, the more kind of the more work that they do. So the pace of innovation is just,
Will be
I
off
don't
the
think
board.
we can. Yeah, it's going to be different.
For sure. And one comment that just came in too, that I'll read here, is Elon Musk says artificial intelligence will take all of our jobs, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, all of our jobs is maybe a bit of a stretch, because I think that we like working with humans. I think that a lot of the job market isn't bred from necessity. I think a lot of the job market exists because people like stuff. Like AI doesn't need to make music that it then plays to other AIs, for example. Those are jobs. They're not jobs out of necessity. It's not like a truck driver or whatever. But I think all jobs that are bred out of necessity to, whatever, can potentially be automated over time, for sure, leaving a very small margin of it. So like it begs us to ask the question afterward, what's a job? Why we're in charge of
Yeah,
this, right? We're not at the mercy. We talk about the market a lot of times like it's a force of nature. We are the market, so we do get a say collectively. If we collectively move in one direction during these periods of great change, it's possible to sway the way the market goes.
yeah,
And is it that bad a thing? If we, I think it's an exciting opportunity to get away from the average job being a necessity you can't avoid, and being high stress, low pay, and being super like chipped
yeah.
away at your soul every day by your job. I think that could become a thing of the past. That whole idea.
I agree. I agree. And like, we're coming up on the end to our conversation, but this is again a huge topic, and I love talking about it. But I agree with the person that wrote the comment, and yourself. I do think what a job is today is going to be like, we're going to have to redefine our relationship to work, to jobs. These tools, like general AI, or artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, are things that are now, looks like we're trending towards. Once we get to that point, pretty much any job that we use our brains to do, like cognitive jobs, which most of our jobs, like in Canada and the US, we don't manufacture many things anymore. So those jobs will be better done, faster, more efficient. Not even like I don't think it's going to be even close. And that's not. I think based on what I'm reading, hearing, that trajectory is potentially by the end of this decade,
Yeah.
which is only like 5 or 6 years, we're going to see that level of artificial intelligence. We're going to have to change the way we think about work, and we're going to have to find meaning, I think, in other areas of our lives, which is, I agree, it's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I think for the average person, work is not necessarily something that they jump out of bed in the morning for. There's a lot of other ways we can spend our time and add value to to our communities and people around us. So I don't think it's a bad thing. The transition to it, I think, will be very difficult, just because in the Western world, especially, we associate so much of our identity, value as human beings with the work that we do.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of these companies are running universal basic income experiments, and OpenAI and Elon Musk, they talk about it openly.
Yeah.
I think there's
There's a
going to be a
lot.
transition period. Yeah.
There's a lot of experimentation probably coming. Well, then, so to wrap up, let's go over, I guess, I feel, Sergey, that I'm hearing from you, and this is, I feel the same way about this, that a lot of the pros and cons have made it such that being a recruiter right now, it's almost more important, like you said earlier on, to motivate yourself by learning, to figure out what new tools are available to you, to try to see where you can add more value. That is the true stability, really. Rather, forget
Mm,
an agency or in-house. If you can be future forward and figure out how to
mm.
get at candidates better, faster, and with better quality and understanding, and learning more about it, I mean, that's the value, whether you're in-house or agency, really.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point to wrap up on. Um, Change is the only constant, right?
Yeah.
And today that's more true than at any time in history, right? So the only way we can stay relevant is to really embrace change and find what the biggest value we can add as human beings. I think you touched upon that. Building trust and some of those things are, I think, where we are still going to be very relevant, at least in the short term. So learning, yeah, I agree, evolving, right? I mean, it's programmed, like we are programmed to evolve, right? It's in our DNA, and
Yeah.
neuroplasticity and all these topics. Like you don't stop learning, your entire life. So I think that's the positive spin on, not spin, but like the positive sort of view of this is that we're part of this evolution. Yeah. So I think it's exciting times ahead, regardless.
100%. 100%. Well, thank you so much, Sergey, for being with us today. If you guys are out there and you've enjoyed this, please feel free to still comment after the fact. If you are watching this pre-recorded later on, as you can see, both Sergey and I love talking about this crap. So hit us up for a message and we can talk about it if you're interested in either agency or in-house or all that good stuff. And see you next
It's a
week.
pleasure. This was
Thanks,
great.
Sergey.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye bye.